They just sit around and soak up each other's awesomeness.
Awesome. Awesome.
That was awesome.
You guys are awesome.
No, you're awesome.
You are awesome.
Sir, you are awesome. Seriously.
Awesome. Awesome. Awesome.
Everything is awesome.
Welcome to this week's edition of Everything is Awesome. I'm your host, Kev, and this is the show where we sit down and talk to awesome people about awesome things. If we did recover that first 10 minutes, this is Deja Vu Cast for some people. Please welcome to the show a guy who made my day about 10 to 12 weeks ago by simply sending me a message saying, hey, Lug, checked out your show. It's great. If you ever want to guest on my show or you want me to guest on your show, I'd love to do it. Since I've started this show, is the first person that reached out to me, and it took us a long time to get this scheduled, but we finally did. And here's the beautiful thing about having to do a do-over: I can get it right without being a fool. Please welcome to the show from 25 o'clock, the podcast, Dan. I'm going to try to pronounce your last name now because I want to say one thing that, and I'll explain why.
Is it Rocky 4? Are you going to say it because of Rocky 4?
No, I'm not. But I'm gonna go what I think it actually is, not what I want to say. And then wait, Drago. Oh, okay. So I have my buddy and anyone that's listened to the show. I forget what episode numbers, but it was early on. Mike DeAngelo. He created this world called Tellist, and in a version of a book that I wrote about 10-15 years ago, I have a dragon named Drago.
That is what it means in Italian. So yeah.
Okay, yeah. So that's so my gut reaction was right. I just went with the wrong thing.
Well, people always do the Drago thing, and I get all the Rocky 4 references to my name from the Dolph Lundgren character, who's playing Russian and not a Sicilian. But that's fine, because if you actually see me in person, I look about as much like a Sicilian as David Bowie. So I've never seen, I'm a terrible Philadelphian, I've never seen a Rocky movie, and that is partially because the idea of boxing, and from what I've learned, Rocky 1 at least has nothing to do with boxing, really. Not really. No, it's just a great 1970s film. And it's really cool to sort of see what Philadelphia looked like in a lot of films that got made like in the 70s and early 80s with Philadelphia, like watch Trading Places or something like that. You really get to see what the city looked like and realize how far it's really come. Like anyone who wants to take a can we use words on this podcast?
We can say whatever you want.
Yeah. People like to shit on my city and be like, "Oh, you're dirty, you're filthy, you're violent. Your people are full of jerks. Your sports fans are the worst." To which I all say, valid, but I freaking love this city, and it's not even my city it technically is my city by birth, but this is not where I grew up. Okay. We can get there though. I don't want to throw your
that's actually, you're like going right to the origin story. I like it. You know how to run up. I don't even need to be here. You can talk the whole time.
If you just want to take off, I'll just talk about myself for the next 60 minutes.
That's fine. Yeah, I could. I want to go get some KFC. And
I was talking to my wife earlier tonight. We were, having dinner up in the house, and I said, I'm really tired, and she said, like, oh, you have to do that podcast tonight. I said, yeah. She's like, you gonna be all right? You're gonna make it? I said, when have I ever been so tired that I don't want to talk about myself?
That's my fiance. She loves that I do the podcast. The whole reason I started this podcast was simply to sit down and talk to people. Like I love talking, and I think 20 plus episodes in now, people know this about me now. Like they know. So I don't know if we caught it or not, but we were talking about like how we kind of differ in how we start the show.
Mm-hmm. I like to do, well, I call it the ambush, but it's not an ambush, because basically what I do is that someone comes in the house, they come downstairs, within seconds of their butt hitting the chair, the mic is on and live. And sometimes, depending if I can think about it, when I know they're coming, before I answer the door, I run down real quick and hit record.
and then I come back upstairs, and then we just come downstairs. So like, you get the first 5-6 minutes that they come in, they get a drink of water, maybe they got to use the restroom, and then they come down, and then I edit out that first chunk. But like I was saying, you never know if they're just gonna sit in the chair and like look at something in the room and be like, oh, that reminds me of a thing, and then boom, you're off to the races. And I would hate to be like, hey, can you stop and can you say that again? Like that's wow, you'll never kind of recreate that moment. So I just keep it running, and I let them know. Very often they're just like, oh, are we rolling? I said, oh yeah, we've been rolling since you sat down in the chair.
Yeah, and that's something that I had I think about 20 episodes in, as we mentioned earlier, and that's something that is like kind of like your common theme is saying like, oh yeah, we've been rolling for a while.
I mean, we're just going, and it's not a gotcha moment. Like I'm not trying to get anybody. If anything, I don't know, people tend to be a little more open when they don't think they're being taped, but that's not the point either. I'm not trying to get you to say something that you wouldn't if you thought about it not have said. And I always tell people in my FAQ and in my follow-ups with them, I said, finish the episode. It's great. We're buzzing. We've been talking for a while. Go home. If an hour home, you realize, like, you know what? When I told that story about that guy from 3 years ago, maybe I don't want that story out there. Shoot me a line. I'll take out anything that you want me to take out before I go out there. Once it's out there, it's out there. Like, I'd be like, I'm sorry, man. Like, I'm not trying to make anyone sound bad or make anyone make bad choices, but if it's out there, it's out there. I ain't taking it back.
Yeah. No, and that's like totally where we have something in common. Like I've been starting I think the last 2 interviews I've done, including this one, if that first 10 minutes is recovered, is we hit recording, kind of go.
Yeah.
And then, but Kevin Smith is one of the guys who like made me do this kind of podcast, because originally, I don't know if you listen to Kevin Smith's podcast or not, but
I'm familiar. Yeah, he was one of the first cats in the game,
or
at least one of the first guys with a name. Him,
yes,
Adam Carolla,
yep,
and I mean Marin to a point. I mean Marin had been kicking around since 07, 08. No, maybe even later. I can't remember when he started. And he does so many episodes that it's hard to just like count by number.
Yeah, well, Smith started in 06-ish, I believe.
It makes total sense that he would be one of the first guys in on this sort of medium.
And I think the dude's name is like Larry or Len something, and he was like considered the first podcaster, and I used to know this history for whatever God unknown reason. I have no idea why I knew it, but Smith does a podcast. I used to listen to his podcast exclusively, plus a couple wrestling podcasts from like Stone Cold, who is still excellent. I actually every now and then will still tune in, and Chris Jericho, who is also really good at talking. And I'll check out every now and then, but I gave up a lot of those mainstream ones for like local guys, just from being in this world and kind of fully embracing it this time around versus like trying to figure out how to make money off of it before.
Oh gosh, yeah. It's like being in your first band and being like, how do we get paid? And then like now I'm in my 30s and I'm just like, let's just get together and play.
Yeah, no, and that's this show came from a combination of like, I really like how Kevin Smith does a show called Fat Man on Batman, and back in the day it was literally him talking to people that were involved with Batman, and like going from origin to current, and his intros are always very long-winded, and that's kind of where I take that method of podcasting. I like to try, and I don't do it as well as Kevin Smith, but I try to give a long-winded, elegant intro for my guests to kind of blow them up a little bit. And the idea for this show was originally like, let me talk to other podcasters, and I was so naive 2 years ago that I was like, there's no way I'll be able to find enough podcasters to do this show.
Oh, there's plenty of us, man.
And I knew there was a lot. Like I knew that there was a million there was hundreds of thousands of podcasters to choose from, but I didn't think it would be easy to land one. Little did I know that like when I embraced podcasting for podcasting, that it was a really cool, tight-knit community.
Yeah, definitely. I've definitely met a lot of cool people that way. There's a lot of people out there doing it. It's, and as we move more towards, we're there. We're not moving there. We are there. As we have moved towards a more, broadcasting the human experience sort of thing right there. Podcasting makes sense. It makes sense that you would make your own radio show. I've been essentially podcasting since I was 7 years old with a Fisher-Price tape recorder, except no one else could freaking hear it.
Mm-hmm. No, exactly. And that's, I didn't really see, it's weird. I found all these things that I wanted to do very late in life. Like I never really knew what I wanted to do. And then like in my mid to late 20s, and I started podcasting at in 07.
You were one of the first, man.
Yeah. And I've been saying, I thought it was 06. I've been saying for the last few weeks, 10 years. And something finally popped up in my time hop or my Facebook memories or something that was me posting like the third episode of my first podcast I did. And I was like, oh, so that was only 9 years ago. I thought it was 10. And that's partially, I guess, 06 just stands out, I guess, because that's when podcasting first happened. And I remember being early on, but yeah, it's amazing that I've been doing it for 9 years, but I started out because I just wanted to sit around and talk and kind of find a way to make money off of it, which is so the wrong way. Like my advice now.
How'd that go?
Yeah, no, not well. If anything, it definitely cost me a lot more money, and I was more upset about it. Now at 32, like I probably dropped for the Philadelphia, not just the Philadelphia Podcast Festival, but for this show, Everything Is Awesome, and a lot of it is for the podcast festival. I dropped probably close to $200 on just useless crap that I'm happy to do it.
What's the useless crap? What do you mean? Like gear or like?
No, like a banner with the show name on it.
And like none of that stuff.
Well, and that's so.
I don't have a card.
Yeah, well, so and this episode, because we're both on the same night, we are so you can we'll get this plug out right away. If you're in the Philly area, come check out Everything Is Awesome at 2 p.m. and stay the whole day to check out 25 o'clock at 7 p.m.
Yeah, I close out the night, which hopefully everyone is loose enough, but not so far gone that they either fall asleep or yell during the podcast. I will accept neither. I will accept neither sleeping nor yelling. Anything in between, we'll figure it out.
Yeah, I'm very excited. It's again 9 years since my last live show. I did a live show in 07.
My first one was last year. I'd never done it before, and we did it 2 weeks in a row because the people. Well, actually, not because they asked us, but because I asked them. Where I was just like, "You got 2 weekends?" They're like, "Yeah." I said, "You want me for both?" And they're just like, and I guess they're only their second year, so they're just like, "Yes, content. Yes, can you do it twice?" We're like,
"Yes."
And I was just like, I'm not even positive I can do it once, but let's find out. I hadn't been that nervous in quite some time to like get that going. Because at least here in the in the underground layer where I am right now, I've got post-production control, and I can shift stuff around and I can play. And also, I'm on my own turf down here. I'm comfortable with everything down here because it's all mine. Like I've had this gear for years and years and years. Some of it is the kind of the side product of being in a band for as long as I have, is that you acquire all this audio gear, at least I did, and that when I decided to start a podcast, I looked around and it was just like, I don't think we need to buy anything.
That's got to be the greatest feeling as a podcaster. Like if you somehow already have all the crap.
Yeah. I had to buy the little bendy arms that you attach to the table. Those I bought.
Gotcha. Yeah, because I mean, I can't even detail. I should have kept track how much I've spent over the years.
I mean, I've been going back like 17, 18 years for some of this stuff.
Yeah, I bought a lot of stuff. The microphone I'm using now, which is a USB mic that I only use when I do remote podcasts, is the most expensive microphone I've ever bought. It's it's $70 some. I've literally I ended up with a Shure microphone for my other setup that I think I had a band. I used to do a show called Sounds of Philly, and the idea was every month it was a monthly podcast where we just showcased a local band. And one of the bands that like I just had known for years at that point left the mic in the studio and like just never came and picked it up. So that's the mic I use when I do in studio or in Shedio stuff, which is really rare because it's right now, I don't know, 100 degrees in here.
Yeah. I'm in the coolness of the basement. I almost said the dank coolness of the basement, but we do not want dank down here at all. No. Because there are amplifiers and about 7 guitars and
and what I liked that you did recently, and I say recently, it's probably a couple weeks to a month at this point, but you showcased your underground layer.
Because I had finished. You know why I did it? It has nothing to do because I finished my pegboard, like which is just off to the side, like a total. And then I did the shelf underneath it too, which is like, I mean, do you have you have your house, right?
Yes.
So like the projects you've been meaning to do for months or gosh, even more than a year.
Yeah, for me it's 4 years.
Yeah, we just bought. We've had this place for a year. Before that, I lived in an apartment. In fact, the beginning of the show was done. I'd say the first 18, 19 episodes. Up to Jay Vertibello, who's episode 18, I believe. I'm picking this completely out of my brain. I'm probably the wrong person to ask factual things about old podcasts for me. But Up to Jay was done in the at the kitchen table in my old apartment in East Passyunk neighborhood of South Philadelphia. And then I did them at the kitchen table for the first couple here in the new place because I just didn't have the downstairs done yet. And then we finished the downstairs, moved in. And it's interesting to look around at all your crap and realize that like it's like 17, 18 years in the making of me having like guitars, amps, pedals, cables, weird crap, synthesizers that don't work, things like that.
That's cool. Yeah.
And then putting it all out in a coherent way, finding permanent spaces for them and being like, holy shit, I have all this stuff? Like, that's how it was. I was like, I didn't realize I had all this stuff. And so, yeah, when I was starting a podcast, you say you've been in the game for like 10 years. Like, I'm a newbie, man. I started in 2014. But I mean, I've kept it going since then, which was like the key thing was that I had to have a consistent level of output. And if I couldn't do that, then I was just gonna roll the doors in and just be like, we're done if we can't do it consistently.
Well, don't let the 9 years fool you. I have done, and granted, some of them were at the same time because I was trying to launch a podcast network, but I have done probably a total of, this is probably my 9th or 10th podcast that I've done in 9 years. Now, it's also at this point, I don't know what episode number you and I are going to be. I just know that we're going to be airing probably around the 17th. August is a big month. I'm doing a lot of recording, and I think we may be doing for the month of August, 2 podcasts a week.
Oh, wow.
Because I'm just doing a lot of recording, mainly with local Philadelphia guys who are probably going to be at the podcast festival. In fact, I know so far everyone that I've talked to is there, and that on top of some of the other people that I have normally scheduled. I think for the month of August there will be 2 aired a week, so this one will be somewhere. It will be the no later than the Friday before our show, so the night before.
Well,
I'm going to aim for the Wednesday before, so people have time to listen to it and then go. I mean, so whatever episode number this is at that point, I think it will be somewhere between 25 and 30 is probably third longest show I have produced, and the fourth that I've been part of. Everything else usually, ended around episode, between 18 and 20 for whatever reason.
Well, there we go. So we've shaken the curse on this one. We're
Yes, totally. And the main thing with this show is that I don't need a co-host. Other shows I've done relied on a co-host, and it was just hard finding, especially when I had kids, like, okay, when are we going to get together to record? Like I always feel bad, especially for my fellow East Coasters. Can you go at 10 p.m. on a weeknight?
I mean, now I can't. I mean, I always could. I don't have kids or anything like that. The only reason I had asked you previously in the day if we wanted to go earlier was just because I can start to sort of lose the plot as we move through this part of the evening, and you as well. I imagine, because you've been up all day and you've been wrangling the young ones, so I imagine it's starting to get a little flaky around the edges right now.
Yeah, well, so I have the uncanny ability to my normal bedtime is usually between 12 and 2 sometime, and then I'll wake up at like 6 a.m.
That's impressive, man. God bless you.
Yeah, I don't, and it's getting harder at 32.
Like it should, yeah.
I honestly, I just turned, at the time of this recording, I just turned 32 about 5 days ago.
Ah, congrats. You made it.
So thank you. Yes, I made it. And I'd say last October, I think I came down with mono. And
that's not something one normally does in their 30s, but again,
no, yeah,
impressive.
I was like,
impressive.
The doctor was like, what did you do? I was like, I shared a beer at my buddy's wedding is probably how I got it. And it really like kicked my ass to where like I don't think I'm back to my full capacity of staying up lately. I used to be able to stay up till like 2 a.m. easy 5 nights a week, and then crash 1 day a week, and then kind of start over.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's like I stayed up till 4 a.m. yesterday, and so yes, you're right. Today I'm a little sluggish,
yeah.
But I got a couple Miller Lights, I got a Pepsi in front of me, and I got a bunch of material around me to keep me awake. Because the show, everything aside from my kids and my fiance, so those three things come first. But then the show comes before. I'm last on the list.
That's important to always put yourself last. That's typically where I try and put myself in the grand scheme of things, because it wasn't always that way. So
Yeah. It was. It's funny. Kind of talking to more and more podcasters, is just kind of shooting the shit about like our histories with podcasting, and like thinking back to when I did it in my early 20s, and like just how I was like an egotistical little bitch.
Oh,
like,
yeah. No, I know that guy. I was that guy. I definitely know that guy. And especially for me being a musician and a musically oriented person, like my snobbery was just able to I was able to express my snobbery in just such wonderful ways that I'm surprised anyone who knew me back then still wants to have anything to do with me.
Yeah, that was actually like my original podcast fell apart because of that, and then and which is like 100%. Like at the time, I completely blamed the producer, and like I still think now as a 30-year-old, I take like at least 50% of the blame.
That's good. That's adult. Yeah,
yeah, because he was a little bit older than me, but he was still in his like maybe mid-20s, so like it was just a lot of ego, I think, in that room. And
no one at that age is equipped to do anything. And I mean that with all the love and like good feelings as I can. So if you're in your 20s and you're listening to me and it sounds like I don't take you seriously, I probably don't. But that's fine. Like that is. Being an adult means I'm going to take 50% of that right there. I'm going to take 50% of that of being like, that's my attitude right now. The other 50% is you being probably a dumbass. But no, I'll take 50% of it. And it's funny too, because oftentimes some of the musicians who come through the show will be in their 20s, and it's just such an interesting time to talk to driven artistic people in their 20s, because I remember how I was in my 20s, and the way that some of these cats talk in their 20s, I'm just like, wow. I'm like, there's a depth of maturity and awareness of self that I certainly didn't possess. So it's, and that probably has something to do with why some of these people are successful or kind of poising themselves towards the potential of success in a way that I was never able to do, because like they are aware and they are driven and they're probably a lot more focused than I was as well. And that's just how it is. And I could beat myself up about that, or I could just be like, this is how it is. Okay. Like,
well, and that's like, I mean, I kind of just figured out in the last 5 years, like, I think I want to write. I think I want to direct. I think I want to do live performance. Like, I'm so on the edge of like, all right, I'm about to take an improv class, because like it just sounds like such a cool experience.
I used to direct improv in college.
Yeah, and I forget, it was one of your first, we'll say 5 guests. You had a comedian. Yeah.
No, she was a theater director.
Okay, yeah.
Jen McMillan.
Yep.
And we definitely had a conversation about improv, because she was employing improv in ways much more advanced, much more interesting ways that I never even really got to. And my relationship with improv now is like completely different than it was when I was 20, 21, 22. You couldn't drag me to it right now. Like, no offense to anyone out there who wants to do it or does it. There's too much cringe in there for me, because I think about me and I think about me being me and the things that I thought were true in my approaches to, like, art and expression, and it just makes me uncomfortable, and I don't care to think about that person sometimes.
There's just something that, and I think it comes from the world of wrestling I was in, where that was very
performance aspect.
Yes. And I actually, I don't, one of my good friends, Garrett Smith, is, a podcaster in the Philly area. I like to movie. He's also a stand-up comedian in the area. And we had probably a 2-hour discussion, via text, just going back and forth about stand-up and improv. And like, I just was exposed to this whole world of like, oh wow, it's like skiers versus snowboarders. Like they don't like each other.
It's sort of. I think that's less of a thing now.
Yes, that's what he said too.
It's. I mean, comedians are like. I mean, I equate everything back to musicianship, because that's just how I approach things. But improv is like a really good pickup ensemble. And if you stack that ensemble with really, really talented players, you're going to get great stuff every time. I mean, truly great improv by very good improvisers, just very good actors and performers, is going to delight you every time. Amateurs maybe not as much, as people are still, like we talk about ego and stuff like that. Like, as people sort of posture and figure out where they are, the most important thing you can learn in improv is that you don't matter. Like, I mean, but you don't matter. It's not about you. It's about the scene. And one of the most important things you can learn as a musician in an ensemble is you don't matter. It's the song, it's the performance, it's the whole. You do your part. You do it well. You help others when you can, but you typically and I say this because I had been a bassist for many years and I played drums. I'm a guitarist as well. But if I'm doing my job correctly, you kind of don't even know I'm there. But if I were to not be there, you would definitely know something was missing. Which to me has always been my comfort area in performance. I've never been interested in being the front man. I've never necessarily been interested in being the focal point, which is odd that I host a podcast. Although then it makes sense, because you don't see my face. Like I'm not performing unless I'm doing it live. And after I did that a couple of times, I'm so glad we did it twice, because the first was great, but it was more great in the oh my god, we did that and didn't die. Type way. And the second time was just like, okay, let's see. Like, the first time was exciting because it was the first time. I said, let's see if it can be exciting the second time, based on actual like ability, as opposed to just like just being jazzed. And it was. I thought it went great the second time too. So I was like, okay, we can do this. And it was actually in the cards to do another live one, not for the festival, but just for something else between then and now. But I guess it didn't happen. So here we are. I'm going again.
Well, and it's hard to, as like an indie podcaster.
How do you get people to come to that? Like,
yeah, like
at least in a podcast fest, there's a context where you're just like, it's a podcast fest. I'm doing a podcast. Okay. But if I were to just like call a club or something like that, I'd be like, you want me to do a live podcast? I'd be like, what? Who are you?
Yeah, like the reason Kevin Smith can do it is because he's Kevin Smith.
He's Kevin Smith, and he was essentially doing his intro to his podcast live for years before podcasting when he was just doing Q&A for like 3 hours in a go. It was like seeing Jello Biafra, but like not kind of being disgusted 2 hours through it.
Yeah. No, I mean he was born to do podcasting. Like
man was just born to just like talk. Like
yeah. And which blows my mind because of the character Silent Bob.
Oh, I think that makes the most sense. I think he was poking fun at himself as well. Is that he is a very talkative. Yeah. He is Jay more than he is Bob. At least and I imagine him in his 20s too was probably very much like that. I dig though that he had enough self-awareness at the time to make a funny character being of him, and he doesn't say anything.
Well, and I as I mentioned earlier, like I'm a huge Kevin Smith fan. I have a list of like 3 people in the podcasting world that are on my Git list, and I was lucky enough to get one of them. And if you haven't listened to it by now, I beat it into everyone's head. Episode 20, Erin McGathy, who hosts This Feels Terrible. She was on. She also hosts Human Conversation. She was on Harmontown for a little bit, and she's a really funny comedian, improv, live performer, and does a long form interview podcast. And same thing with Kevin Smith does. One of his podcasts is long form interview, and Aisha Tyler from Girl on Guy.
Oh, hers is great, and she's fantastic.
Yes,
just as a human.
Yeah, no, and the thing that I love, Kevin Smith is actually ironically probably the one that does it the least, but what I love about Erin McGathy and Aisha Tyler is that the way they do it is the way I'm hoping that this comes across, and it's not standard Q&A.
Yeah.
Like it ultimately there's bits and pieces of that in there, but ultimately it just sounds like 2 guys or 2 gals or a guy and a gal just sitting around talking, having a good time.
Yeah.
And that to me is like the best kind of conversation, where you can just go. I mean, I've had, I think, a handful of guests where we went an hour and a half into the show before we really sat down and said, "Hey, let's talk about you for a little bit."
Yeah.
And to me, that's great.
What do you want to know?
And that's that's my segue is that, well, and I got to say that you're like right up there with these other long form podcast interview people.
That's really nice of you to say. I mean, that's a good list right there.
Yeah, I am, as I mentioned earlier, not really a music guy, and that's obviously like your world. Most of your guests, at least for the first 20 or so episodes that I've listened to, are very, in that world.
Well, here's a spoiler for the later ones. It continues.
and that's fine. Like, it's done well, and I get an hour or so of more information about somebody. It's almost, when I listen to your show, it's very similar to, I think it's more conversation than Q&A. And to me, that's puts you above a lot of other podcasts or interview podcasts, because that's just what I look for. So it's like I'm in that room, a fly on the wall.
Yeah.
And I love learning. I mean, I talk to musicians too. I know nothing about music. I mean, but I will talk to anyone about it, and I will learn, or at least learn for that hour, and just soak up that information. And that's, to get me to listen to a music based podcast is good for you. You did it. Like that's a huge win. Just interrupting the show for one quick moment so I can let you guys know that you're listening to this episode with Dan Drago. But guess what? If you flip over to 25o'clockpod.com, you can listen to episode 49 of his podcast and hear me be a guest on his show. That's right. I don't think we timed it like this on purpose, but there's some crossover synergy this week with Everything is Awesome and 25 O'Clock Podcast. That's right. So you're going to get Dan Drago on Everything is Awesome for today and on Friday. And while you're waiting for Friday's episode, you can head on over to 25o'clockpod.com and listen to me do the chatting thing. Thanks, Dan, for having me on your show. It was a whole lot of fun, and also having you on my show was a lot of fun, so thank you for doing that as well. And just as a reminder to everybody, we're both going to be at the Philadelphia Podcast Festival. We're both going to be there on August 21st, so you might as well make a whole day of it. That's this Sunday. That's just in a couple days from now. So come on out if you're in the area to Tattooed Moms on South Street in Philadelphia. I'll be on at 2 p.m. with Everything is Awesome, and Dan will be on at 7 p.m. to round out the night. Just hang out. I'm going to be there all day. I'm going to get there before the first show at 1 o'clock. I'm going to hang out until Dan's done doing his thing. So I'm going to be there to support the Podcast Fest for the day. I want to hang out. So if you want to come hang out with some cool Philly podcasters, that's where we'll be. Back to the show. So let's get to your origin story. I had no idea, and obviously because it's not about you necessarily on 25 o'clock. I kind of always assumed you grew up in the upstate New York area. I'm from
Western New York, yeah.
Okay. And then you came to Philly, but you mentioned earlier that you were born here?
Yeah, I was born in Philadelphia because that happened to be where my parents lived. I'm the oldest of three, so I was the first one to come along. And yeah, I was born here. We lived in King of Prussia, Norristown areas around up there. In fact, one of the houses I lived in up on DeKalb in Norristown is still there. Every once in a while when I find myself around there, I have to drive by and kind of look at it. And it's just, I still get kind of eerie gooseflesh memories of it where like we left the house when I was 2, but you know,
oh, wow.
I still, I look like the back of it particularly because that was kind of the yardish area. And I look at that, I'm like, I remember this place even though I have absolutely no immediate sensory memory of it.
King of Prussia Mall has, to me, the best comic book store in the world for comic book fans. Like this is how good it is. I forget the name of it.
I know it's there. I've been there probably once or twice myself.
It was the first comic book store that, like, when I kind of found comics and that I didn't feel awkward walking into, and everyone there. I think the dude's name is JD. He hosts the Pop Tards podcast.
Comic book guys love being on podcasts.
Yeah, I mean I wanted to get him, and I still can. I have the podcast. I wanted to get him on a show back in the day, and then I stopped doing it, and here I am doing a podcast again. I can easily do it.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, I mean, when I walked into the store, it wasn't like awkward to walk in, and they made you feel at home. Unlike that's a key thing, especially I guess not anymore because everyone's a comic book fan now, basically.
I guess. I think that also makes, I don't know, whenever you get into like these very niche-y subcultures, comics, record nerds, stuff like that, like you're so protective of the thing because you've sort of hung a large amount of your identity on it. So if anyone comes in to challenge it or anyone comes at it in a way that you don't necessarily agree with, it seems to sort of like rock your whole worldview, and some people have a hard time handling it. I mean, like for me, you talk about like going to comic book stores when you were a kid, and I definitely did that growing up. I was a big comic book kid, and I still am to a point. I'm probably less dialed in. No, I'm not even probably. I definitely am less dialed in than I used to be.
Yeah, I mean, I went from kid loving it to teenager. I was too cool for it.
Yeah.
In my early 20s, I rediscovered it, and it's
me too.
They're awfully expensive.
Definitely. I have the same trajectory. Whereas I became a teenager and it was comic books, and then I got a guitar, and then that sort of just, there's only, as a teenager, your brain can only handle so much, and for me, it was guitar. And also like being like comic books, sci-fi, subculture, all that was not cool. In the 90s. It was not cool. It was fine, but it was, it wasn't nearly, people talk about geek chic and like, the whole, and, turning the word nerd into a verb or an adjective, however you do it now, which at times makes me roll my eyes, not for any reason that I was just like, oh, that was us. I'm just like, it's just people digging stuff. Like,
yeah. Well, so 2 points to follow that up with. A, it blows my mind that we live in a world where there was when Force Awakens released, there was a commercial of a kid building an R2D2 unit to ask a girl out on a date to go see Star Wars.
There is no way that would have been acceptable in the early 1990s.
If I even had tried to do that, I would have been shoved into a locker.
I would have been fed that R2D2.
Yeah, like it blows my mind that we live in a world where now the minority is the kid who says, "I'm not going to go see Star Wars because it's stupid." Like, and that's fine. Have that opinion. Yeah. I won't fault you for that, as long as you don't, fault people for wanting to go see it.
Yeah.
But it's weird, the world that we live in, that it's totally acceptable now.
It's marketable. Like they figured out a way to market it, and that's fine. Like I'm gonna love Star Wars because I grew up loving Star Wars, whether because I was watching, versions of the original trilogy taped off of television with commercials in it. Like that's growing up to me. Yeah. You can sell it, package it however you want. I think when you get down to it, like a good song, it's a good story, and there's something in there for everyone, for adults and kids. So like, I like aspects of that. Things like Star Wars kind of getting a reboot under some really, really good guidance. I'm into it. Other stuff where it just seems like things are just getting made to be made. I feel like a lot of the Marvel franchises right now have sort of fallen off. I thought Age of Ultron wasn't particularly great, and I thought Civil War was a major disappointment. Now we don't need to get into that. It's just that's my personal preference. It's just I don't want to make a thing out of it.
No, all I'll say about Civil War, then, if you don't want to make a thing out of it, is it's definitely not as good as Winter Soldier. I think
my God, that was 3 Days of the Condor, except with superheroes. It's like the greatest superhero film I've ever seen in my life.
Winter Soldier probably stands up as the best film Marvel has ever produced.
I would agree on that. Yeah.
I personally think season 1 of Daredevil is the best thing they've ever produced.
Until Jessica Jones, I would have agreed with you, right?
Well, no. Yeah, I'm not saying all their Netflix shows.
Yeah.
Daredevil season 1.
No, it was truly really unique. To spend a whole season sort of dealing with someone's early origins as a superhero, I thought was amazing.
Yes.
I thought the cast was outstanding and it was really well written.
Yeah, no, that is, I think, better than I mean, it's a different playing field than Winter Soldier, so it's hard to
fair.
Yeah. It's not fair to necessarily compare them, but if I had to pick what I think is the best produced thing they've done, it's Daredevil season 1, and maybe parts of The Punisher in season 2. Season 2 definitely not as good as season 1, but
no, but it definitely. I mean, how could it be?
You can't. Yeah,
there was. I walked into season 2 just being like, "There's no way this is going to blow me away," because season 1 we were just sitting there being like, "Okay, just don't suck."
Yeah, and I mean, they won over and over again with that.
Yeah. No, it's I love all that. I think I'm more engaged with the sort of at least the mainstream comic book world in films and television now.
No, I mean, I will every now and then try to catch up. Like specifically with The Walking Dead. I'm a fan of that comic book. But I say that I'm probably at least a year and a half behind. And what I was always a Marvel kid, and
yeah, me too. Yeah.
DC, when they did the new 52 thing, I was like, all right, let me read Batman. Like, I'm a Batman. I like the Batman movies. Let me read Batman. And at the time, Scott Snyder was writing it, and Greg Capullo, I believe his name was illustrating it, and it was so great. It's the only thing, and from what I understand, it was the only thing good of the new 52 or whatever they called it. And I mean, they've already gone back to, I don't know, I think they're calling it Rebirth. They went back to the old numbering. But that's the other thing is the new 52 Batman, as I was I'm probably again a year and a half behind on it, but for a time that's all I caught up on. I'm a mainstream comic book fan now, much like the rest of the world.
Yeah.
I may have deeper knowledge than some other people just because I'm more into it. But for me, I think Marvel, I mean, they have disappointments, but nothing that's where I'm like, well, that was horrible. It's all right, well, that's a Sunday morning, rainy day popcorn flick.
Yeah, and they're the only movies I really go out to see in the theater much anymore too, which is on me. I used to be much more engaged in film as well, but I think part of it's just getting older and you have less time.
Yeah.
I have a little less of the attention span for some of this stuff too, which is odd. Like you would think when you're younger, your attention span's all over the place, but when I was younger, I could watch I could watch French films. I could watch Chinese films. I could watch stuff from the 60s in America, stuff from this. I can still watch stuff from the 70s in America, absolutely. But like now I'm just, when I do get an hour and a half to 2 hours to myself to watch a film, typically I'm just watching something I've seen before as more of a comfort thing than anything else, which I don't know what that says about me.
See, I'm more of now in my 30s, I'm more of a TV person. TV is no longer like and I don't even say shameful because I've always liked TV. It's always been
great TV. There's just been less of it. Yeah.
It's just, I think it's like AMC like is on point. Netflix is, I don't watch all their originals, but every original I've watched, I've really dug. And that includes, obviously Jessica Jones is not as good as the other stuff, but I think David Tennant is one of the best villains Marvel has ever produced. I thought he was wonderful.
I thought he really, and Tennant is one of those guys who can just really play a psychopath, like in a way. And the thing that I love the most about his depiction of in Jessica Jones was the moments of where his wheels are clearly coming off the cart, and he becomes just the personification of this like temper tantrum throwing brat child, which in some ways reminds you of some of the worst aspects of the sort of male dominated comic book culture, sci-fi culture, sort of that aspect of pop culture. And I just felt that there were so many levels going on right there that I, rather than try and unpack them all, you just let them wash over you. You're just like, a lot is happening right now and I'm into it.
Yeah. It was so far out of the series as a whole for Marvel Netflix is probably the worst, but that character was just great. Well, and me saying the worst doesn't mean it's bad.
3, right? It's
yeah. So it's number 3 of 3. It doesn't mean it's terrible.
So are you counting Daredevil as 2, 1 and 2?
Yes, I am.
Oh, okay.
So I guess that's not even fair. That it's 1 of 2 right now.
Yeah, what I found with Jessica Jones and is that I've never seen a female protagonist dealt with in such a way that it was just something to see. It really was. The way she was personified, the way that she moved about in her life as a character, the way that she got to have gray areas, the way that she got to be not an anti-hero, but not exactly a shining knight. I thought you see that with men constantly. Like that's a whole archetype of character right there. But to see her do it was phenomenal. And I could pick apart that series for hours and hours on end. And I could go wake my wife up and come down and she could do it even better than I could. But yeah, I really enjoyed that. But that's been the thing I probably most enjoyed about Marvel in the last 5 years. So,
they're crushing it on Netflix. And same thing now, I think DC crushes on TV. Like I'm a fan of their CW stuff, like The Flash.
I like The Flash. I like the first couple of seasons of Flash. I thought it was. Yeah, I liked the heavy story mixed with light. It was still like an entertaining show to watch.
Arrow. I liked Arrow season 3. A lot of people kind of fell off with that. They really fell off with season 4, and I can't even defend that. Like I get it. One of my favorite things that happened was the Arrow subreddit is now they have the Daredevil logo over the Arrow logo, and now they're discussing Daredevil season 1 because they are so upset with season 4 of Arrow. But yeah, I mean, even Legends Tomorrow is I mean, it's not as good as Flash, but it's a good watch.
I haven't seen any of that. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a fun, like, time traveling adventure. Brandon Roth is great as the Atom. And what's the dude from Doctor Who, Arthur Deville, whatever.
Yeah,
he's wonderful in that series. Supergirl, I'm so happy it's at CW because now they can do it right. I think not that it was wrong. I loved it on CBS. Took three episodes to get into it, but I don't know if you watched Flash. I don't know if you've watched the Flash crossover with Supergirl.
No,
but
I didn't get that far. No,
that is, and I guess it was technically a Supergirl episode with the Flash on it, but it is hands down one of the most, and it's, as a 32-year-old saying this, you feel free to judge away, but it is one of the most adorable television episodes, an hour of TV I've ever watched. It was just so fun. It's even if you don't watch Flash or Supergirl, I think it's worth the watch because it's just a fun thing to watch.
I will put that on the list.
Yeah. All right. Anyway.
Yeah.
So your origin story.
Yeah. Born here, moved to Western New York. I grew up in a town called Fairport, New York, which is right on the Erie Canal. It's right outside Rochester, which is like just smack in the middle of Western New York, right on Lake Ontario. I went there, went to high school, went to college on Lake Erie, so I just switched lakes. In a little town called Fredonia, New York, which is smack between Buffalo and Erie, Pennsylvania on I-90.
Okay.
That's where I met my wife. That's where I directed improv, was in a couple of bands. That's where I got into radio. I got into college radio probably my second day on campus because I met a dude in the bookstore with I think he was wearing a Pavement t-shirt, which is an indie rock band. And I came from a town where like not a lot of people were hip to that kind of music. And so for me to meet someone who had a Pavement t-shirt, I immediately started talking to him. And he said, oh, well, he's like, I work at the radio station. He's like, you should come tomorrow. We're having a meeting. And that's how I got into college radio. And that's how I met my friend Jim Briggs, who I've been friends with, ever since. I did college, and then I left college, bummed around for a little bit, had jobs, and moved here in moved to Philly in 2004.
So what made you decide to come back to Philly besides it being the greatest city in the world?
It is the greatest city in the world. I don't know if I mean that ironically or not. It's in a way that it's funny. This is a city where like you can live here for a very long time and feel like definitely part of it. But every once in a while, something will crop up to remind you that you ain't from here. And not even in a bad way. They just something reminds you, be like, you could live here for another 50 years, but you will never truly be from here. And there are times where I'm just like, you know what? I'm fine with that. No, I moved here because one of my best friends growing up in high school, a guy named James Hearn, he and I started bands together in high school and kind of tried to keep bands going back and forth in college, despite like going to college in different places in New York. He moved here in 2003, and I think between 2003 and 2004, I came visited Philadelphia like 3 times. And at some point it was like, you know what, just to make life easier, I should probably just move here. And we decided too that when I moved here, we were really going to make a go at putting a band together for real. Like we felt we were a little more adult and like had a little bit more of an idea of what we wanted to do. And that was 2004, various incarnations of that band. And he and I were in bands together until 2013 when I left the touring world and left the full-time band world, or the attempts at full-time band world.
So that was what you did.
I worked
and everything.
I worked, and then I would rehearse, and we would play shows wherever we could play shows. And we would make records, and we would play with our friends, and we would, stay up late and not get paid very much. That was our life.
So, and I'm always fascinated by this because you played long enough to kind of be in both, like kind of, I guess, eras, like old school way of handling music and then the new media way, where you have YouTube and iTunes and kind of going away from the physical media to digital.
Mm-hmm.
How, did it make things easier? Did it make it harder?
I think the answer. I think the answer is both. I think there was more opportunity, but that opportunity meant less. Like if it's that whole thing, like if everyone gets a trophy, then that trophy is meaningless. And if everyone, if everyone has access to put their band's music up on some sort of place. I guess originally it was MySpace before it was anything else. And one of the joys of MySpace was all bands were created equal. Everyone's page looked the same. You could be the Mars Volta, or you could be, a bar band in the middle of Indiana. Your page looked the same. The number of followers was obviously very different, but you were kind of... people could approach you the same way, and you kind of look the same, which kind of lent everyone sort of the same level of legitimacy, I guess is the term that I'm looking for. And that's great. I think it's good to have legitimacy. I think it's good to have an output. Back in the day when I was in high school and early college, if we wanted to make a record, it was a more expensive endeavor. It took a lot more time, and you really only had so many swings at that particular pitch to get it right. Whereas now, I could sit here tonight and by the end of the week give you a record, and I could have worked the entire time on it, and it wouldn't really cost me any more money. Mm-hmm. If I'm making any sense here.
No, totally.
So your question is, what was it like then versus what was it like to kind of like live on the bridge? Because I really do feel like I lived on the bridge, where up until a certain point, being in a band and creating music and having an output for that music kind of went one way. There were a lot more gatekeepers in the way. That was the avenues to success were much fewer. I think also there were just fewer bands back then too. I don't think it was a matter of perception. I really just think there were fewer. And then kind of coming into the MySpace, YouTube, Spotify, like all that world. And I think we were poised well enough. And when I say we, I don't just mean my band. I mean like guys my age or around my age. We were poised pretty well where like we could still pick up on it because we were still kind of consuming music through these new avenues. So it wasn't like, what is this thing? We knew exactly what MySpace was. We knew what Spotify was. We knew what iTunes was. We knew what YouTube was. Like we knew what all these things were. But I think I always graded against certain elements of it because my heroes didn't need it, so why should I? One of my favorite bands of all time is a DC band called Fugazi, who are a punk band, and they were very much always my model in how to do things absolutely your way. It wouldn't necessarily work for everyone, but it worked for them, and I would constantly kind of... whenever I would kind of start to get lost or start to like need a bit of a focal point, I would sort of think to myself, I'm like, if I was in Fugazi in 1996, like, how would I approach this? Which is like a stupid thing to ask yourself. But it was, I needed a magnetic north, and they were typically mine. It didn't always jibe well with the people I was working with. Like, I was one of those guys where I was just like, I don't want T-shirts. I don't want ephemera. Like, I don't care about that other than records. I was just like, we're a band, we make records. I didn't pick up a guitar because I wanted a really cool T-shirt with my face on it. Like, I picked up a guitar because I wanted to make music and make records and play shows. Yeah. And I think that is one way to look at it. It's a very limited way to look at it. It's the way I kind of looked at it for a while. And then you could go on the other end where I would see bands who like I really didn't think were that great, like couldn't didn't think their songs were that great. I didn't think they were anything to write home about, but they had amazing followings and really great branding, and they had great T-shirts, and they sold, T-shirts for the girls. They always tell you, like, you would talk to, like, some guys would be like, yeah, always sell a girl a T-shirt one size too small, and of your band, and then have her wear it. And I just that's everything about the music world that makes me gag. That whole thing, and I could go on and on about that, but I don't want to focus on that point. I'm answering your question a really, really long way.
That's fine.
It was hard. Is what it was. It was hard, and it still is. What I like doing now with the podcast is that, like, the pressure is off for me to have to, like, make work, like, to, like, make music. But I'm still a fan. Like, first and foremost, I was always a fan. So I like to celebrate people who are out there giving it a go in a way that I was doing it, or even more so than I was doing it. I really like to find the people that I think are unique and doing really interesting shit. And it doesn't matter if what they're doing is getting them attention or not. I just want to talk to them. Anyone who's willing to go out there and really try some stuff, they get my high five, like, every time.
No, and it's when my early podcasting days, we were always, we modeled ourselves after, like a 2-hour radio show on 94.1 or 93.3 up in New York or whatever.
Well, those were the models you had to work with back then, which is, and I would model myself after the bands that I liked, that I grew up listening to, not knowing that, like, sooner or later it was going to be completely moot. And it wasn't going to be a terribly useful model anymore.
And so we did, like, all right, well, we got to have bands on, because that's what we're doing radio. You have to interview bands, but we always were very, and I to this day, I just expanded it from music to everything. It was always like an indie world, and so, like, I mean, I can't really, I guess I can't name them now because I'm just so far removed from that world. But back when I hosted both, my happy hour show, and eventually, especially I co-hosted the show, the Stabcast. We would have, I had stacks and stacks of just indie CDs.
Yeah.
That I've always dug indie bands or local bands way more than mainstream. And not that they're any more or less talented. It's just you can almost hear all the hard work that goes into it.
Yeah. When you get into the mainstream bands too, like, there are some bands that are mainstream and massively successful for a reason. And it's obvious, like, when they get up and play, that, like, these people, like, tens of thousands of people come to see, tens of thousands of people go to see Paul McCartney for a reason, is because he's an insanely talented songwriter, and he's written songs that will stay with people, till the end of time. But I definitely used to be that way too, where I was just like, I'm only interested in if it's, grassroots, regional, accessible by, like, all this big major label stuff is crap and all that, which was a posture. As I've gotten older, I got better at just being like, look, if it's good, it's good. And if it's playing to 5 people at the local bar, or if it's selling out the Wells Fargo, like, if it's good, it's good. I've had to change my tune on a lot of stuff, which is always an interesting thing to do, to sort of re-examine your position on certain artists or something like that. I don't know if you've ever done that with any mainstream artist that you, like, swore you didn't like, and then one day you just kind of wake up and you're just like, crap.
I constantly will hear, and this may be a bad example depending on what your favorite type of music is.
There's no bad example.
And I'm not, like, I consider myself, like, I was always a fan of, like, Less Than Jake, and
I
and,
love
like,
those guys.
Yeah,
the whole
like
third wave ska stuff in the 90s.
Mm-hmm. And like all like old rock, like Bon Jovi, and stuff like that. If you go back and listen to some my Aaron McGathy episode, is where I admit on this show. I've admitted it in the past, but I admit on this show I was also a fan of the Spice Girls in the mid 90s or whenever they were around. So, like, my musical taste was awful. at the same time as having some quality.
No, but you like what you like too, and some of that stuff too. If you're a certain age, like for you, the Spice Girls, like you were like they basically made a math equation where you and people like you were the answer. Like you just there's nothing you could have done about that.
I was 12 years old.
Yeah. That's why I had Criss Cross record when I was 10 or 12 years old. It was designed for me. Like I was powerless to I was powerless to do anything about it. Like it was marketed specifically for me.
Yes. But I up until this year, if I ever heard or anyone ever brought up Dave Matthews Band, I'd be like, please, it's awful. Like, I don't like it. Like, I guess I hear the talent, but like, it's just awful music. I don't like it. It's awful to my ears.
So what was the switch? Where did you switch? I'm interested in this.
It was like just a song that played that I heard 10, 15 years ago, and I hated it then. And it was just on the radio, and I'm like, oh shit! It was on 104.5. I'm sure that's where it was.
Oh yeah, I imagine. Yeah.
And I heard it on there, and I was like, kind of like tapping my foot to it, driving, and like singing a couple of the lyrics, and I realized what it was. I was like, shit, I like Dave Matthews Band.
Yeah. Oh, I have a very complicated relationship with the DMB, because they came out like Under the Table and Dreaming came out. I think I was in early high school, and again. Talk about things just being just a softball underhand pitch, just being right lobbed to you. I always, the people who tended to sort of, because it was much the fans as it was them. In fact, I probably knew nothing about the band and like just didn't really care for the kind of people who would sort of who were gravitating towards that music. But what changed for me was I heard the Dave Matthews and Tim Reynolds live at Luther College set, which is just two guys on acoustic guitars stripping down, some of his biggest hits and stuff like that, stuff that I'd heard, for years before that, stripped down to two guys with guitars. And that was when I really got to hear him as a singer and really got to hear him as a guitar player and just be like, this cat is something else. Like, and for him to choose to sort of, adorn his sound with like a violin and a saxophone instead of a more typical rock band like another guitar and a keyboard or something like that. Talk about like what I said before. I like it when people try shit, especially out there shit.
Yeah, and I think also like I don't know if I just heard it and it was a nostalgic factor, or if I think also at 32, it goes back to me being a dick in my early 20s. Like
you're willing to let go certain prejudices at some point.
Yeah, like I just kind of listened to it and liked it, and like I was never in. Like I can probably count on one hand how many times I smoked marijuana in my life. I'm a big drinker, but like, so I was never in that crowd. Like I had friends that were in that crowd and liked the music, and that's why I would hear it and like get angry about it. And I think I went to one concert of theirs and had a good time because I ended up getting hammered in the parking lot, and just drank a lot of beer. And then, I remember, like, kind of rocking out, bobbing my head to it. And then I remember sobering up saying, I don't want to be here. It's Dave Matthews Band. Why am I here? But, I mean, it's probably Crash is the one that was on 104.5.
Yeah. That's the song we used to all learn on acoustic guitar to play for girls. Like, that's pretty much, like, whenever I hear Crash, I'm just like, yes, the dorm room special right there.
Okay, we're going to end the show right there. Thanks, Dan, for being on part one of this week's Everything is Awesome episode. And because we are in August and this is Philadelphia Podcast Fest month, we're doing at least 2 episodes a week. So this week is Wednesday, part 1 with Dan on episode 28 here. Episode 29 of this podcast is going to be on Friday. That's part 2 with Dan. We're going to come back and finish our conversation. We're going to talk more Dave. We're going to talk guitars and podcasts and a whole ton of stuff in part 2. We're going to get to know Dan even more than we already got to learn about him now. Make sure you go, we mentioned it in the commercial break, but you go check out 25o'clockpod.com, not just for episode 49, which is my episode, but for all his episodes. He does a very good, very clean, very awesome long-form interview podcast. And it's up there with all the ones that I like. You know, I said it in the show. I love listening to Aaron McGathy's This Feels Terrible, Girl on Guy with Aisha Tyler, Kevin Smith's Fat Man on Batman. I am going to listen to Mark Maron. I promise you guys that, as I promised Dan. But Dan's 25 O'Clock is really good long-form interview podcast that's mostly with musicians, and there's some early ones that are not with musicians. I'm still binging it. I try to keep current with a lot of the podcasts that I'm already listening to, and then when I have some downtime, I'll binge 25 O'Clock. So it's so good. Go listen to it. And of course, make sure you check out PhillyPodFest.com for more details about the Philadelphia Podcast Festival. That's just in a couple days, guys. Sunday. Today is Wednesday. So just in, 4 short days, we're going to be live on the stage, if you will, at Tattooed Moms in Philadelphia. It's on South Street. Go to PhillyPodFest.com for more details on the address and the other shows that are performing. We've already talked about how we're doing a late night theme. I enlisted Mike from TellUs.com to be my co-host, my Ed McMahon, my Steve Higgins, my Andy Richter for the night. We enlisted Garrett Smith to come provide some comedy stylings. He's a fellow Philadelphian podcaster. He's a stand-up comedian in the area, so he's going to tell some jokes. And then for our big guest, we got, did we announce? I don't think we announced it on the podcast yet. So here it is, the big announcement for our guest. Drum roll, please. It is the founder of Savage Personal Fitness, Orlando Berrios. And for anyone that's been following me for a long time, you know that Big O was a former co-host on one of my podcasts, Happy Hour. So we're reuniting for one day only. He's going to come. He's going to talk fitness. He's going to talk about how he dropped, I think it was like 50 pounds, how he's cut like a Greek god now. He's going to do a personal fat test or whatever. I don't know. There's a proper terminology, but he's going to see how much body fat I have. He's going to put me and Mike to the test with push-up contests, maybe something else. I don't know what he has in store for us, but it's going to be a good, happy, fun go time. And of course, we're going to give some swag away. We got TellUs books. I got some loot. I got some Everything Is Awesome swag to give away. So we're going to have a lot of fun at the Philadelphia Podcast Fest on August 21st, 2 p.m. at Tattooed Moms on South Street. Hang out for the entire day because our guest this week, Dan Drago, he's rounding the night out at 7 p.m. as the first weekend of the Philadelphia Podcast Fest comes down with him. So it's going to be fun. We'll see you next time right here, only on AwesomePodcast.com.